I have read the hands of Jimin from BTS a couple of times on my channel, and I've recently compared him to the hands of JK as well. And you know what? I've come to the conclusion I got him all wrong. I came to the conclusion that he is a fire and water hand composite type, that he is intuitive. And a lot of the things that I said about Jimin, from what I'd seen in his hands, I actually got wrong on reflection. After reading a lot of your comments, thank you for that, by the way, I discovered that in fact I did get a lot wrong. So I've reassessed, I've hit the drawing board. And a lot of reasons why I got things wrong is because Jimin is a very complicated person. The images I was looking at are kind of distorted. When you look at a person's hand that's sort of side on, it distorts things. Yes, he is an intuitive hand type. He does have fire and water in his hands, but he also has air. Now, when we see too much or a great degree of elements, we have to kind of abolish the elemental system and look to something that defines someone by their key individual characteristics and then draw conclusions from what all of those things mean together. He is a composite type. He does have air in his hands as well. The hand type is not quite square, but it's not, it's almost square. It's only just rectangular. The fingers are not short, but they're not quite long. So he is, and it's kind of smooth. Fingers are a little bit sort of pointed. The whole hand itself is kind of smooth, except for the heel of Pluto. The knots here as well don't really fit, so nothing really fits. He's a composite hand type. He's very eclectic in his nature. He's probably always found it very difficult to categorize himself, always felt like a little bit of an oddball. And for the composite hand type, it's very difficult for them to succeed in life unless they identify their very specific and eclectic skill sets, group them together, and find a way to carve a career out of this. For Jimin, he's done extremely well in this respect. So in this video, I'm going to be identifying 8 key characteristics about Jimin that I see in his hand and how this relates to him, what this shows us about the bigger picture as a whole on a more accurate level. Now, this image here is pretty blurry, but it's really good for the fact that it's flat on. We can see with clarity just his hand shape and fingers with a lot more detail in terms of just the angle that the image is taken, whereas all of the other angles, all of the other images I have of Jimin are kind of distorted in this way. You don't really get a clear picture of things. His hand is smooth, and the quality of his skin appears smooth in texture. It's rounded for the most part, except for the heel of Pluto, which is providing him with practicality of skills from previous lives, believe it or not, which in fact is really useful for it, because without this edge of kind of residual practical skills that allows him to learn things in this life quicker, he would probably be a little bit more on the impractical side. I mentioned that he is intuitive in previous videos and probably not all that able to plan ahead. And actually, I got that wrong. I also mentioned that he's not all that analytical. And I also got that wrong because he's analytical, but he is also intuitive. He's got this very balanced view, a very rare kind of combination of both having logic and creative adaptability, which means that he's able to dip into his abstract as well as look at things very pragmatically. There are overall these knots here, they provide us with, they slow down thought processing. It makes us more detail orientated, but at the same time, it does create blockages here. It means that he's not able to respond in the moment. And this does create some hiccups for Jimin because there's a few things that I see in his hands that go that don't work in his favor, shall we say, in this respect. Now, one of them is his obvious sense of self. Now, I mentioned that he doesn't have incredible self-awareness, and the reasons why I mentioned that is because he doesn't have a great sense of self-worth. And for me, if you don't have a great sense of self-worth, you can't fully have a great sense of self-understanding, a great sense of self-awareness. Jimin has this propensity to sell himself short. And When we look at what is higher in his priorities, he is more about having fun. He's more about enjoyment and happiness. He's more about success in terms of success and what that means to Jimin is much more about glory and reputation and his name. And the reason for that is to in some way compensate for his reduced sense of self-worth. So from the get-go, the fact that he's probably always felt as something of an outcast, at least in terms of not really being able to sort of feel like he fits into any one kind of social group. He doesn't really feel like he doesn't fit in with the sports people or the business people or he's not really any one kind of person, and that's because he's a massive kind of a very unique mix of many things. So feeling like a bit of an outcast already reduces his idea of himself. So the first thing I want to mention here, in terms of specifics, is, and I have already been a little bit specific, really, is his thumb because it's long, but it's thin, and logic overrules here in terms of his personality, and governs where. So willpower is a little bit weaker than his logic. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but because he has a reduced sense of self, because glory and public opinion matters to him greatly, he may well at times be susceptible to kind of getting pushed around, or his if his willpower was just that little bit stronger, was a little bit larger, heavier, then he would be able to stand up for himself that little bit more. But where he is really gifted is his gentle, warm approach. He is compassionate. He has a kind and gentle nature. And he's also actually very diplomatic as well. He's very tactful. He's very sensitive to the needs of others. And that kind of comes into um, is connected with his idea and thoughts about how others perceive him as well. He's constantly thinking about how others feel. So this is a real strength, but also I worry it slightly that he lacks the ability to stand up for himself at times. And particularly where there are louder voices in the room, he may at times kind of feel actually, like just sort of being quiet, even though he might well have the best idea to hand. Often, unfortunately, the loudest voice in the room prevails. The sheer length of his thumb means that he is, in fact, a planner. And I kind of had that wrong before. He is able to act on his plans, although he doesn't have exceptional willpower. That doesn't mean that he's not someone that's able to commit to his many and varied and creative, imaginative, original ideas. So, with the Apollo and the Saturn mounts being higher than Jupiter, he places what he can do for others, his creative abilities, his talents, as prioritizes these over his own sense of self and what he can get out of any given situation for himself. He prioritizes others and what he can bring to the table, how he can operate in a group, what he can do for his community, his family, his friends. He really prioritizes love, beauty, art, creation, creativity, connection, relationships, um, and his work over himself, really. So he is kind of liable again to not valuing himself enough and not putting himself first when he should. And this need to be validated by others to have an audience is in some way kind of born out of this low sense of self esteem. So the fingers, they really hold clues as to our psychological framework. They reveal the health of our psychological landscape. And Mercury is very telling in several respects. Firstly, it leans away from the rest of the fingers. This aspect of communication and expression is separate to the rest of his psychology. It's on its own. There's something about his ability to express a facet of himself that he's avoiding potentially. He absolutely needs his own privacy. But more than that, it's actually very low set, and you get a good sense of that here. contrary to popular opinion, it's not all that short. It's just very low set. And what that means for Jimin is that he is it's a mixed blessing, because whilst he manages to view the world with a very fresh and actually refreshing perspective, because he's able to view the world through the lens of a child, in that he is playful, he's experimental, he's in constant search of um, why things are fun, what makes things go, what happens if you put these two things together. And this is actually kind of what's missing from the perspective of, well, adults. When we get into adulthood, we kind of lose touch with um, this experimental, playful side. This ability to see things through that lens um, is really powerful. But at the same time, he's kind of stuck in his mind in terms of expressing himself through in this way. The most significant thing I see about Jimin's hand is this blockage here. And for me, this points towards a potential abandonment issue. I've mentioned this in a previous video. And this is a blockage. This is likely linked to a maternal relationship when young, and it probably has some clue here as to his own sense of self-worth, his need for validation from others. And in order to kind of understand, in order to unblock this aspect of his communicative, expressive psyche, he needs to explore this aspect of himself. And once he does, this finger will kind of move in a little bit closer to the rest of the fingers. There's probably a likelihood of avoidance here as a defense mechanism. He needs to explore his most complex emotional framework, his emotions in the moment, and in an appropriate way, at the right time, in the moment, to really gain understanding of himself, and increase his self-awareness, particularly around his emotional articulation. That's where Jimin really struggles. And once he does this, he's really going to be able to unlock this aspect about himself that creates significant insecurity. So that's what we're seeing here. We're seeing here, whilst there is this experimental, playful, humorous, childlike perspective, there is also insecurity, there is hesitancy, and there's a lack of confidence as well. There's a lack of security. So he's searching for security, and that's why we see an increased, a very heightened amount of Apollo here. It's essentially to compensate for this lack of self-worth, for this lack of confidence, and insecurity as well. Now, the fourth thing I want to look at here is his heart line. In previous images where I've tried to look at this and analyze it, it's not been all that. Although this is, a fairly clear image, it's not clear in terms of the angle. It distorts findings. But what I have seen about this heart line, when I kind of cross-reference it with other images, particularly this one, even though it's not all that good, it does show me that the arc of it, the curvature of it, reveals someone who has a powerful emotional kind of um, response. Someone who has great capacity to love and be loved, a great need to love and be loved, and someone who their love language is very physical. So he requires touch, he requires a hug, and requires it quite a lot as well. And this is for reassurance. And again, it's because of insecurity. He's in constant search of security. Now, he has a big heart, so he needs a greater security to keep that heart safe. The bigger it is, the more that needs protection. He's also quite flirtatious. His physical, affectionate needs are quite strong, and this is actually kind of compounded by the widened basal phalanx, the third phalanx of Jupiter here. His physical needs are quite strong as well, not just in terms of physical affection, but in terms of kind of physical, bodily needs as well. He is a bit of a flirt. But for the most part, he is very generous with his emotions. He wears his heart on his sleeve, and his heart needs protecting. For Jimin, a hug goes a long way. Now, of all the lines on his hands, the headline does in fact appear strongest. And, just to reiterate, I mentioned in a previous video he's not that good at planning ahead. I was wrong about that. He is. And he is also creative. He has this very unique blend of being both very logical and creative. This image here shows us actually a relatively straight headline, but it's pretty misleading, and that's because of the angle of it and the way in which he's stretching his hand. Actually, he has a very creative and a very powerful headline. He has an abundance of thoughts. This is also backed up by what we see in his thumb as well. The headline begins very high, not very high, but certainly high up on his hand, which shows ambition. But his ambition isn't, I would say that there is some degree of thinking about money, but that's not so much, he's not fueled by what money can do for him. The headline resides underneath Apollo. And this is exactly, the trajectory, the shape, the size of it here, the depth of it, where it's landing on the palm in Luna, in a pronounced area of Luna. This is showing me someone who has exceptional muscle memory. This is showing me someone who has an idea for the creative arts. And when we combine those two things, it's kind of obvious that we've got someone who's a choreographer or a dancer, expressive in movement. Maybe a stuntman or a martial artist might come into it as well. It's important not to rule everything out. He's likely, probably gifted in all of these areas as well. And what we see about his headline and the way in which it's joined to his lifeline quite tightly for quite some period of time, it's showing us here that he is hesitant. Not to a degree where he's going to miss out on opportunities, but there is something of an overcautious, it's slightly overcautious here, and this is because of his lack of confidence. This is what it's showing us. And I find it really interesting as to how his lifeline pulls away from the headline, because it does so with um, without hesitancy almost. It does so in a way that's very direct, and look at the trajectory of the lifeline. This is really telling, and I'm going to get around to explaining this shortly. But first of all, I want to explain a little bit about his hand shape here and what's unique. And for me, it is the heel of Pluto. If his palm shape were any more um, rectangular, he'd probably be at risk of being overly emotional. But thankfully, this little edge here that Pluto provides gives him a strong practical edge. It gives him um, an ability to be a lot more skillful in terms of how he deals with day-to-day environmental issues. And a lot of this is because Pluto is the area of ancestral memory. It's the area of ancestral kind of memory, recall, and our past life memories. So what this is showing us is that he has quite literally an edge on others in terms of his ability to relearn skills, should I say, because he has kind of a residual um, imprint from at least one previous life, that he's been provided with this instinctive tool here to relearn things and master things that little bit quicker than most. And this empowers Jimin to implement his instincts in a very practical way in the moment. So this levels out some of those negative traits about him not being able to act in the moment, or at least um, where he's not able to speak for himself in the moment, he's able to act for himself in the moment. He is finely tuned with his body, what his body is telling him on a very intuitive level. And this again is showing us that whilst he's very analytical, whilst he's a deep thinker and he's detail orientated, he's also highly in tune with his subconscious. He is connected so intuitively, so instinctively with his body in a way that I don't even think he's aware of. Now, his sunline here is intertwined with his destiny, and it begins at the age of 18, and it's through his hard work, dedication, and application of his individual skills that he has provided himself with the roots of success. And you can see this It's very faint, but there is a kind of a shadow here, and Luna kind of leans into this and supports this line of Apollo, this sun line here, and you can kind of see it around about the age of 18, supporting and rising up towards Apollo here. So I'll talk now a little bit about his lifeline. I have mentioned that it's up around about the age of 18. Again, this is kind of compounding what we see, what I've just mentioned here, the breakaway from his fate line with his sun line here at this age of 18, and his lifeline breaks away at this kind of drastic and sudden um, time in his life. And the lifeline does this suddenly from his headline at this age of 18. Now, he quite literally um, breaks away, flies from the nest at this time, and really, I'd say carving his own independence isn't the right way of putting it. It's almost like he falls out of the nest. You know, he's thrust into a world of having to kind of be independent and look after himself all of a sudden. Lifelines like this, and when I say like this, I mean straight, are lifelines that are very bold, very courageous, very explorative, that are trying out new things, that are inventive, imaginative. That's what it's showing about his personality, at least. He is not afraid to try out new things, which in some ways kind of contradicts a lot of what I said about him. But again, this is all part of Jimin. He is an extremely complex character, and there are lots of different aspects about him that make him up as a whole. And this is what palmistry is like. You can't just look at one thing and say, well, this means this, and case closed. You have to look at the whole picture. And I'm guilty of this, just as most other palmists are. And I have made mistakes with Jimin because he's just so complicated. Now, it's around about the age of 22 or so. There is a tremendous effort line here, and it rises in between, well, I'd say mostly on Jupiter. And this is showing us that there is a tremendous effort made here to develop, to work towards and complete accomplishment here. This is an achievement here that is made, and it doesn't rise up past the headline here. So this is really fulfilling an idea, a plan that he had about himself. What's really interesting about this is that there is something of an idea that goes against this. So there's almost some sort of sabotage that almost worked. There was almost a complete U-turn. There was almost an idea that to change his mind very suddenly. There was a threat here to complete his own ambition, threat that he himself almost made against himself. Thankfully, it didn't work because, you know, the power of this improvement, this effort line here is so strong here that you can see it kind of affecting. You see this rising improvement effort line here as well, rising up towards Apollo here, and this is showing us this rise to fame at this time. And you can see that before or during the beginnings of around this success, things were really difficult for him in his life. Now, at the age of 30, again, there's another improvement, and this is a much more self-fulfillment kind of improvement, accomplishment. This is a greater feeling around himself and self-awareness, which is really powerful, and that's exactly what we want to be seeing. And if you look at his life just a couple of years before this, you can see there's this travel away. So for me, where we're looking at Jimin, this is at his life right now, this whole area, this blip right here. So we've got travel and improvement, and together they create something of an island. It's not quite an island because it's a convergence of these lines that create that appearance, but it does have a similar meaning. For me, this is Jimin having been enlisted. The improvement thereafter is this feeling of success about himself having accomplished an arduous struggle. He's done something that he didn't want to do, potentially, or he wasn't looking forwards to, and it's over and done with, and that part of his life is complete, and he feels better for it in some way. He feels better about himself. He feels stronger. He feels more accomplished. And it's after this time in his life that his life becomes very, very busy. It's just super busy after this time for many, many years. There's going to be significant changes in his life at the age of 40. And it's around about this time where I start thinking to myself, okay, well, you know, 18 to 22, lots of changes here. 30, lots of change. 40, lots of change. in increments of 10 years, there's great change that Jimin goes through, and the age of 50 is no different. Look at this. His lifeline kind of appears to stop suddenly at the age of 50. Now, I'm just going to reassure you, this doesn't mean that he's going to die at 50. Just want to make that clear. I'm not saying that. But his fate line appears to also kind of stop, or at least become very faint at age 50, and it doesn't really seem to reappear again. So what I'm predicting here is that there is going to be a massive and very sudden and unforeseeable life change at the age of 50. I think 45 is going to be a significant year for him as well, and I think there's going to be a development in business here. I think he might well create something here. Maybe it's a record label, maybe it's some kind of designer label. I don't know. There's going to be some other kind of industry or business that he starts up here. So to summarize, I was all wrong about Jimin on a lot of fronts. There is air in his hand because he's a combination of fire and water. When you put fire and water together, you get pressure. And what does pressure create? So, and this is why, and that's not always the case. It doesn't always work out like that. But in Jimin's case, there's so much here to consider that it would be unfair to kind of try and classify him in just one way. And really, I suppose Palm readers should be identifying every single fundamental, specific aspect about the palms and try and draw a conclusion utilizing all of these. That's just what we do. But it's much, much easier and makes much more sense to conclude through classification, partly because palmistry is just so complicated anyway. But Jimin is an intuitive and an analytical hand type. Jimin has a big heart, and a big heart needs a lot of security. And really, many of the signs that I've seen in Jimin's hands show a very vulnerable person, a person who requires security. The search for security, in particular, when it comes to relationships, for someone like Jimin, can be a treacherous road, a very dangerous road to walk down, particularly for those who are trying to exploit or manipulate him. But whilst Jimin might come across as naive, and probably plays the role of someone who is naive, because of this childlike lens, and because he's kind of potentially, it wouldn't surprise me anyway, if he's fallen into this role because of the way people have treated him. At the same time, there's power to this because he is very clever, because he is very instinctive, and he is very analytical. So he's much smarter than I think a lot of people give him credit for. He's cautious, he's balanced, and with this balance of instinct and logic, I think that Jimin is actually very equipped to navigate in terms of the minefield that is relationships. So thankfully, a lot of what I've seen in his hands levels out some of the negative things as well. What Jimin does need, though, is more confidence in himself, in his own abilities. What I would like to see for Jimin is a greater self-sustainability, a greater ability to be more comfortable in his own company. Because that's what I see here. I see here someone who is scared to be on their own. The key for him is to reconnect with his child, his inner child, at the point in his life where he felt most abandoned. To understand this on a level that allows him to love himself. Quite literally, he needs to reconnect with his inner child and love his inner child in order to find fulfillment and happiness and be more independent in this way, more emotionally independent. Thank you all so much for watching. If you would like a palm reading yourself, please do book a palm reading with me through my website. If you've got any questions about this palm reading, please do drop them in the comments below. Let me know your thoughts. I'm very keen to hear all of your thoughts, comments, compliments, as well as criticisms. Thank you all so much for watching, and I shall see you on the next one.